Okay, yeah, so I think people are back more or less from lunch, and we can start our very nice and intimate discussion of the data. So the talk is called Surveying the Community, What Could Possibly Go Wrong? And my intent was to provide a crash course on surveying the community, trying to explain how the things work. But I have now a nice story regarding to the crash course, actually, because on Tuesday I had to fly here to Bristol. I had my flight in the evening from Amsterdam. And in the morning, I got something similar to this. It was not exactly like this because I had a Mac, but it crashed with all my slides, presentation, and everything on it. So I came to our administration team and I told them, I really, really need my presentation from that laptop, and it's there. But because it's not the up-to-date version of the macOS, we don't have time to run the full time machine. We don't have full time to restore it properly and just to keep the proper image. So at least get me the data, because I need it. I need data. And they managed to do that. So in 4 hours, they grabbed my whole disk and even the browser caches, and they brought it back to me on this nice new laptop. That's how I got the new Mac from them. And they told me, this is your data, but you don't have any tools. You don't have any apps. You just only have the data. And I'm like, now I probably have a story for my talk, that I have the data, but now I need to learn how to interpret this data because I have zero tools on my nice and new, fresh laptop, which only knows my data, but zero tools. So yeah, I managed to install it more or less. I think I will be installing it more in the next months, just step by step get into like, yeah, I missed this tool and also this tool and also this one. But yeah, generally. A little bit about me, if you don't know who am I. So I worked in the embedded development for 8-something years, mostly telecom, launching 4G LTE networks, doing various network devices, and the rest of the fun stuff in C and C++. I also then joined JetBrains, where I'm working for 10 years already in marketing, surprisingly. Since this year, I'm finally doing C++ just for my hobby, because I'm now the head of marketing and BizDev in our .NET tools. So C++ is finally just my hobby. And as part of the hobby, I run the Dutch C++ user group together with our nice other hosts. So if you're around Amsterdam, please join us as a visitor or as a speaker. So, and we'll have Guy in June joining us in Amsterdam doing the talk. And he also could be a speaker at the Amsterdam meetup. We're a very nice and friendly group, and we like hosting talks all over the world. So please do let us know. But moreover, and more importantly, we're launching a new conference in the Netherlands, and I will use this nice opportunity to promote it a little bit. It's called C++ Under the Sea. You could probably get the joke if you know a little bit more about the Netherlands. So it's in Breda in October, 11th of October. The call for paper is open. And as a program committee chair, I'm desperately engaging you to submit. We need great talks. It's just one-day event. It's a nice location. Breda is a nice city, and you can get there from Schiphol or Eindhoven, which is cheaper. So nice travel, nice country, a little bit nice vibe under the sea. And so please come and join us. To the talk. Why do we need data? Actually, this is the most important question, because before we start talking about how we do the surveys and collect the data, why do we at all need it? And the answer is pretty simple, because these days we can't afford making decisions without the data. It's simply not possible. I've heard many stories from the companies that pre-pandemic, for example, they were doing some business, and during the pandemic, it really grew, because it was really like everyone was at home, they were using different services, say online, and these companies were like, oh, we're making lots of money. But then the pandemic kind of stopped. And they were like, we're not making that much of money. How now we should make the decisions? Should we collect some data on how the people actually use that and then make the decision based on this data? And that's what the data-driven decisions mean and what the data-driven development actually means. And this is important because these years, the companies, especially if you look at our IT sector, we have layoffs, we have cuts-offs. The companies trying to shut down whole departments sometimes if they think that they're not bringing them money. So now every decision costs us money. So if you don't have the proper data, or you have the data but you don't know how to interpret it in the way it works for you correctly, you're in trouble. So the data is important. How you can use the data, and actually I have to say you should do all these kind of things if you collect any kind of data. In JetBrains, we collect a lot. Through different service, we do our own surveys. We partner with other companies. We do buy external researchers as well if we think they're qualified for our goals. And everything is aggregated in one source of truth. So we have the thing called Survey Visualizer, for example, and there I can find any type of the resource on any topic. So if I want to look for something, say, from the game dev, I simply go to this survey visualizer, I search for like games, and it lists me all the surveys for all the years, all the researches we've done. Say I have the Perforce, which is not our research, but we're partnering with Perforce and they're sharing some raw data with us. So we also uploaded it to the survey visualizer. We have several surveys, we have several researches. We can filter the data and I can actually find what I'm looking for through this simple search. So also, like when I figure out some research, I can look at the actual data and I can slice it. For example, if I go to the Perforce data and I say, so which languages do the programmers in Perforce data are actually using? And the Perforce research is actually very much about the AAA game dev. So these are not the surprising numbers that they have most of the people saying C++ and just some small portion of C#. So I can get this data, and also I can, for example, say, okay, and what are the AAA games studios are actually using? And they will be like pure C++. That is also not a surprise, but I mean, I can slice the data in different ways. I can request the data in different ways quite quickly. So it just takes me like a couple of minutes to learn the fact. So I can come to, say, if I have some nice meeting where we are doing some business decisions, I just open the survey visualizer. I'll wait for a couple of minutes for it to upload all the data. I request some specific researches or look through what we have on a topic. I slice the data and I come to the meeting prepared. I know the data already. I can base my suggestions on this data. Just another example is the developer ecosystem survey we do since 2017, and it's a huge portion of data we keep through the years. And I can say, ask, which C++ standards do people regularly use? And I can see some data, and it's nice to see actually C++ 20 and C++ 23 doing good last year. But also I can ask, and what about the people who regularly go to ACCU conference? I can also ask the survey visualizer for that. And I will get nicer data. We're doing good. But we also have this data. I don't know who are these people. I need to find them at the conference. They're probably doing some embedded stuff with the oldish compilers. But I can slice like that for different parameters. So also what I can do with the data, and which I really do recommend, so if you have any kinds of data, build the dashboards. Because no one actually in the team will be, diving into this survey visualizer for every question. They're mostly coming to me and asking the questions. And for the years, I learned to reply to them, just take this link, check this dashboard. All the important information you usually ask me is there. So I build dashboards for like C++ markets, for .NET markets. I maintain and update them constantly. And I have there several sources aggregated. So in my dashboards, for example, for C++, I have the foundation survey, I have the Stack Overflow data, I have the developer ecosystem data. So everything is in there. I also have slicing through different sub-markets. So I can easily go and say yeah, you need some game dev C++ data, go to this dashboard, open this tab, and find it there. So data is very convenient and very useful when you're doing some data-driven decisions, and the representation is important. Moreover, through the years, we realized that some more people are interested in the data, so we started building this thing called Developer Ecosystem Data Playground. It's actually open to everyone. It's a public link. I'll share it in the end. So you can go there and actually do some requests to our public data from Developer Ecosystem and slice some data for yourself. So even though we do publish the raw data yearly for our Developer Ecosystem survey, I do realize that not everyone would like to, grab this whole database and dive into it, but you can just do it visually. It's not all the data which is presented there, but you still can get some insights if you are interested. Another example of how we work with the data and how the data actually affects our decisions. So last year, we obviously started asking people about how do they use the AI tools, because we're living in this generative AI tools area, and we want to know how many people are actually using it, relying on it, or familiar with it. We are getting some nice numbers, like we know that the majority of the developers are familiar with the AI tools, which makes my job in marketing a little bit easier. I don't need to explain to them what it is. But then I want to know more, because actually AI tools is important for development. And just to show you a small demonstration of why, I will run this video, which is probably you can't see properly, but I will try to explain. So what I'm doing here is AI assistant, JetBrains AI assistant is generating the code for me, and I'm just writing the comments. And I'm just writing some code with the iHand library. So say if I'm, for example, doing some calculations or I'm doing some automotive stuff and I'm just working with the libraries, and I can just do like that. We even did the demo when our developer advocate was coding a whole Unity game without typing a single line of code. He was just typing the comments and the AI was generating the code for him. So we're interested, like we know about these very powerful capabilities of the tooling which exists already now, like GitHub Copilot or our JetBrains AI assistant or many other models. So we were interested, like how the people are actually using that. Are they relying on that? Are they allowed to use that? So we started looking around and say we are we are working with the game dev community, and for example, we're going to the game development conference in San Francisco every year, and they are doing a nice job with actually publishing a nice report on a game dev every year right before the conference start. And they're asking there about the generative AI tools being used at the company, and they collected some very interesting data, say that nearly half of the people, they are actually having the generative AI tools in their company, in their department. And 1/3 of them are actually using these tools themselves. However, the nice fact that we learned looking deeper into the data, because these are the data which you can just find on a first maybe 5 or 6 pages of the report. But if you dive deeper, you figure out that actually quite many, 1/5 of the AAA game developers, they're not allowed to use the AI. And I can understand why, because they have all these proprietary engines. They're not allowed to talk to the public LLM because they will, share all the code of this game engine to it. So of course, like compared to the indie who just, it's like 9% of probably people who are trying to like save their code. So if I just look at the first part, I will be very excited. Like so many game developers are doing AI, that's cool. But then I look at the big customers who I'm mostly interested in, and I do realize that quite many of them are really not allowed to use the tool. So we also ask in developer ecosystem about the reasons they're not using the tools. And so 20% are actually having the security concerns, which are quite expected, but the good number means a lot to me. So I now can operate with that number. So this is just one of the examples how we work with data, so how we dive deeper, so how we are not relying on just the number, which you have on the top of the report, because quite often the reports are quite nice. They have this summary, and most of the people are just reading this summary, and they're like, oh, great, I learned everything. Now I know everything about this market, for example, or this language, but dive deeper, like see how they're collecting the data, and we'll see today how these things could differ based on that. So let's play a little game. The most important question we're usually asking our research team, and we have a big research team in JetBrains because developer ecosystem survey will be impossible without that big team. We're asking them constantly, how many professional developers are there in the world? And it's important that I say professional because the first you ask is about how many developers are in the world in general. But then being in our business, being a vendor for the tools, for the paid tools, we do realize that probably we are not interested in all the developers in the world because our customers are mostly professional developers who have money to pay for the tools. So we start asking about how many professional developers are there in the world. And then I came into the room and saying how many C++ developers are there in the room. And most importantly, how many professional C++ developers are there in the room. And you know what they're usually answering me first of all in return? They usually ask me, please define the professional developer. And this is important because there is no single definition of a programmer in like any general survey or general research. So usually what we build is we build on top of several definitions from different official like legislations, documents, so to be on the same page. Because say if you take the game development and if you are thinking about the developer, but it's much more complex. Like it's about 20 to 30% who are doing actual like gameplay development in the game. There are many people who are doing like tech artist or a game designer. Do we count them? Do we want them in our data? Or we don't? Or say more complex, they could be like some CTOs or managers or whoever are doing different types of jobs. Are they counted? So are they included into the data? Because sometimes if you get the data and say like, yeah, I have like X number of these developers, they all should use my tool. But do I have a tool that is targeted on all these roles? Probably not. So it's important to understand. So usually when we do our researches, we take all the full self or part-time employed developers and freelancers whose one of the job is like either just the development or a QA or team lead or something related to databases, architects, DevOps, and technical support. We take all these roles into the definition. There is no unified methodology, but we had to come with something unified so that we can treat all the sources in the similar way and agreed on that. So, okay, now the quiz time. I would suggest you to tell me a number. It could be any number out of your hand, and we'll try to figure out how many professional developers are there in the world in 2023. And the one who is closest to the answer will get this nice prize from me. So, you have big chances. We're not a big group, so you can just shout. 65 million from Guy, and 50 million, okay. Any other numbers? 500,000? Okay. Any more? 2 millions? Any other opinions here? 20 million? Sorry? 8 million? Okay. Any other opinions? 30 million, okay. Anyone would like to take the chance? 100 million, okay. So, okay, if there are no more options, so this is the number. Yeah, 13 millions is the correct answer. I guess 8 was the closest, right? So, yeah. It was 8 and something was like 20 was the biggest one. So 8 is closer. Yeah, so this is for you. Yeah, so there are, due to our researches, and this is the combination of different researches we rely at, it's like 13 million is the amount of the professional developers worldwide in 2023. Some more quizzes without the big prizes, but just for fun. What do you think is the top country in terms of the number of professional developers in the world? I like the answer China, because it's correct. Actually, India is number 4. China is number 1 for many years. So if you do target your software on developers worldwide, you have to think about China because it's the biggest piece of the cake. And if your software, for example, is not localized or you can't download it from China, which happens to many of our software, especially if it's on the European servers, you're excluding the biggest market in the world. So you have to understand that. You might do that intentionally, but you have to think about that. So, and generally, in terms of the numbers, and this is important for how we build the survey, so there are 17 countries in the world which covers the majority of the developers. So it's like 70-something percent of all the developers in 17 countries. So the shares we built here are built on several surveys. So it's Stack Overflow, developer ecosystem, and several other proprietary researches we just buy for this purpose to calculate the numbers. But then it's interesting how we do calculate per language numbers. So we take this professional developers worldwide number. Then we know from different surveys, we know the share of the language Usually it's built compared to Java. It's a fun thing. Usually it's easiest thing is to measure Java and then to build others from this share. So we know that it's like 8 to 9% for C++ as a primary programming language. I will explain later why this word is also important. And so you like get this a little bit more than million of professional developers who use C++ as a primary programming language. In like it's a mistake. It's 2023. I said that primary is important because it's also like you can either measure primary programming language or you can measure the regularly used. And these numbers are different. You can see that the regularly used is like twice more. So then again, it depends on the goal. For which number you need actually depends on your goal. So if I want really those who are focused only on C++ or mostly on C++, I will take the primary language as my number. But if I want to target all the developers who do at least something in C++ more or less regularly, I will take the second number. And this is important. So yeah, and this is actually how the shares looks like through the years for the primary languages. If you are interested in how we are compared to other languages, how we're doing, I think we're doing quite good. Looking at some languages that are decreasing, I'm not naming them. Yeah, and also like this is the overall usage, like regularly used languages. You can see that they are all doing quite good, actually. But I have to admit that the number of the polyglot projects actually raised through the years significantly. So we see how these big numbers for the regular reused is now being built, while in the past, regular reused was very similar to the primary language. So we're working in the polyglot environment. Talking about the service in the community, actually, we're not alone just doing that, and also there is a foundation doing that, and also there is Jens doing a big job with meeting C++ in Germany. So, but these surveys are different, and I want to speak about the like similarities and differences. There are other surveys in the community. Some of them are more continuous, like our surveys. Some of them are just happening from time to time. But these are the like I would say the top 3 from which you get the data specifically about the C++. So if you want to get some general data, you definitely also go to like Stack Overflow /data, GitHub, and others. So in terms of these C++ specific surveys, so we're running the survey since 2017. Foundation does that since 2018, and Janssen is doing since 2020, but it's kind of continuous survey. So both JetBrains and C++ Foundation, we just run it, stops it, publish the data, and Jens is just collecting the data constantly. If you manage to like pass through the capture, which is a C++ code. And it's nice, but I mean, not everyone could probably do that. Anyway, so there are several major differences that like developer ecosystem survey from JetBrains is global for all programming languages we are interested in. So if you want to learn any data about Python, JavaScript, Rust, Core, whatever, you can go there. And we also have some specific sections not targeted to some specific language, but like targeted to some job role, for example. C++ Foundation is obviously focused on C++ and same for meeting C++. And yes, our survey is significantly longer because of that, because like we have many other languages and technologies, so the foundation and meeting C++ are kind of smaller. But again, meeting C++ is a continuous survey, and it shows you some random amount of questions from this 88 now, I guess, list. Important number is the number of replies actually you get. It's hard to say how many replies the meeting C++ survey gets because it's the continuous survey, so Jens is not publishing the results in the way we do. So I can only compare foundation and developer ecosystem by JetBrains. So in 2023, and we haven't run yet the developer ecosystem for 2024, this is important. So sometimes I will be comparing with 2024, but when I'm just doing the exact data comparison, I will be comparing the 1 year data, the 2023. But the foundation survey already ran and they published the results quite recently, just before the ACCU. So, and this year they got 1,200. Actually, this is significantly less than last year. They got 1,700 something. And we managed to collect like 2,600. And this is after cleaning the data, which we will discuss later. And now comes the like most important difference probably in the data and in how you should look the data and in the like depending on the goal you have, it depends like which data you need to take. Because if you compare the developer ecosystem user experience in like C++ programming to the C++ Foundation answers in 23 and 24, so you can probably see the difference. So C++ Foundation is collecting the data from the people who are having like quite big experience in programming. So it's like 39% have 20 plus years in programming and 26% have 20 plus years in C++. That's a lot. And this is compared to the developer ecosystem, where you get kind of an average distribution, and you see that one of the most two popular groups are 1 to 2 years and 3 to 5. So you get more of an average data, and you can really see it for the data. So how the, for example, tooling different for these people, or how what they do is different. So, and this is important because the first time when I looked at the foundation survey, I was concerned with some answers. So I saw some similar trends, but some trends were completely different. And I was like, why? What is happening? But then we managed to get the C++ Foundation raw data several years in a row, and we sliced through these similar age ranges. I mean, the age of experience in C++ and programming. And we saw that the trends are not that different. But because the people are more experienced in foundation survey, you get the data shifted towards this group more. So then again, it depends. It's not something that is good or bad about either of them, but that depends on the task you have. So what are you going to solve with this data? Interesting question, let's run some short quiz just briefly to another warm-up. So what do you think? What's the approximate percentage of the respondents who don't attend any C++ conferences regularly in 2023? Okay. 20? 95? 5? We have quite a different size of the spectrum. I know we're sitting here at the conference and discussing the people who are not attending the conference, which might be a little bit creepy, but hopefully some of these people will watch this recording and will figure out why they have to go to the conference. So actually it's 80. 80% of the people are not joining any and not attending any conference C++ regularly, which means regularly in our terms means at least 2 times in the past 5 years, which is really not regularly for some of us. But yeah, and we can even figure out the numbers for some specific conferences actually in this survey. Okay, so important statement. Every survey is lying, which means every survey is biased towards many factors. But there are ways to define that and to understand these differences and to work with this data and to work with these biases. Sometimes eliminating them, sometimes just accepting them. So it's important to not just understand that the survey is lying, but to understand how, what, the answers depend on how and what you ask, and also when and where. So for reducing the errors, we came up with the several stages and several filters to trying to eliminate the bias or to reduce it significantly. And we'll be talking about this. And the statement bias is the only one which is directly related to the C++ language, and we'll discuss some cases. The others are quite general, and we do this for every language. So the sampling bias is very simple. It's about cleaning the data which you collected. Because our survey is quite big, and it usually takes up to 40 minutes to fill it out. We definitely raffle some big prizes, and we share some Amazon certificates, raffle some laptops, whatever. And because that, quite many people just want a prize. And so they're trying to, cut the corners and to fill it out in a not a fair way so that they just get the prize. So first of all, we're excluding everyone who doesn't have any programming language as a primary. We are probably excluding some good people from the results, but we really are interested in the people who do some programming in some specific languages. So sorry if you're in that group, but we need the other data. Also, we actually recording the speed with which you are filling out the survey. We know it's impossible to fill it out in 3 minutes. We just know that. So if we see that there are quite many answers, but it was filled very quickly, we just, throw it out, because that's not the correct data. Also, because the people could fill it several times, we do base some the checks for identical answers. They're based on the IPs. And so usually what we do is we just take one answer, like some common answer, based on all this. So we're not excluding it fully, but we're just taking one out of the whole group from the same AP. And also the same email address for sure. It's just a nice criteria to merge the answers. But also there are quite funny conflicting answers. And sometimes I always get actually these answers from our research team because they ask me to validate if they look like a true answer or maybe not really. But sometimes it's quite obvious because sometimes the people say that they are 80 to 20 years old and they have 60 plus years of experience. I feel envy. Or 80 years old CEO with 10 years of experience. Really good to be them, but I don't really believe so. But maybe there are some genius in this survey, but probably we're more interested in the more general data. Anyway, then it comes to the responses burden, because as I said, it's 527 questions in 2023 survey overall, but we're not running them all through all the respondents for sure. We're targeting the primary languages, so we're asking you about 3 primary languages you are using, so you have to select 3, and then we're asking the questions for these primary programming languages for sure, and from the regularly used, we do some randomization, and we show these languages to 50% of the qualified respondents and not all of them. So we just select some randomly and do some collection of the data. And also there are some extra sections, we have 8 extra sections about unit testing, about team tools and some other stuff. And we only show 2. I guess 2023 was the only exception when AI section was shown just to mostly everyone. But generally we do randomize this fact just to make this burden a little bit less. But it still takes 30 to 40 minutes. So if we see 5 minutes answer, it's usually a no-go. But I have to say that last year we managed to collect 35,000 answers. And out of them, most of them were fine. So we cleaned maybe a couple of thousands out of all of them. And the rest were quite reliable. And in terms of C++, I have to say that Bartek with C++ stories is amazing, because we usually do share the call for survey in his weekly newsletter. And we always get great numbers. I mean, last year we collected 243 full answers from his audience, which is a lot. So that's the best channel for us in C++. Neither Reddit nor CPP Slack, where I do post the survey every year quite intensively, never gave me this kind of numbers. So Bartek email is great. So if that's just a tip, if you want to learn something about the community, share it in the Bartek's email. It's actually great. Then comes the brand bias. And the brand bias is something you can't fully eliminate, because if you do the survey or the research as a brand, say we do as JetBrains, or Microsoft does as Microsoft, we won't be able to eliminate the brand. People will know that this is for our brand. First of all, we'll have to say that, because GDPR kind of pushes us to do that explicitly, that we're collecting the data for this company for these purposes, so we can hide the brand properly. And we don't want to actually. We want people to know why we're collecting their data, where to look for the results. So this is not something we can remove completely. But what we try to do is we try not to focus on, say, our customers, for example, or our audiences, because we have quite a decent channels in social media and in blogs and on sites, and we know we can reach out to people. We can put banners everywhere, and the people will come and fill out the survey. But then we'll get the data from our audience. So what we try to do is that every year we push the survey and we collect data through external channels, not related to our channels. And that's why actually developer ecosystem survey is run without fixed date where we end the survey, because we run it until we collect the sufficient number of answers from every of these 17 important countries from the external channels. And until that, we will run the survey. We'll spend all the monies on that, but we'll do that. But it's not something you can still eliminate. So we quite often see that our tools are trending in the results in the developer ecosystem. And that's kind of expected, because the people still know us and they still trust us to give their data to us. But it's not that bad because you can't maybe say that from the form of the slides, and this is just another bias maybe. But foundation survey results 2024 brought me the number for, say, C-line is 27%. They ask the questions as a primary IDE you're using and the journally, which tool you're using. And so for this journal tool, I got 27%. And for developer ecosystem, it was 26% for me last year. So it's quite close. So I think we're doing good here, not really that much biased by the brand. Yeah, but it's funny enough because C++ Foundation, I'm talking to Herb about this every year, but they still have these nice IDEs in their list of IDEs for C++. Just for the tip, they do not have the C++ support, neither Web Store nor IntelliJ IDEA. And they have the Android Studio separately, so it's not the bias that that's the same tool. I don't know what these people meant there. So, but anyway. Another important bias that we want to eliminate is the regional bias. And this is an important thing. And as I said, so we know that the majority of the developers are located in 17 countries. So, and we try to collect the answers. But to collect the answers from these 17 countries, what do you need to do to collect these responses? And yeah, this is the number 14 here. And this is unfortunately related to the current situation because last year we didn't run this survey on purpose in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. So that's why we actually removed these 3 countries. But we still have 14 countries to collect the answers, and we need at least 300 responses from external sources, such as ads and other channels, which are not ours. And to do that, you need to actually remove the language bias. Because if you do just the English survey, you see in the top country in terms of the number of developers, it's China. They won't be filling that out. They don't know English that good. They are not reading even simple sentences in English, quite the majority of the developers there. So if you just do the English language survey, you're excluding quite a big number of the developers in the world. So we do 8 additional languages. So we do translate to Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Korean, so all the Asia group, and Brazilian, Portuguese, Spanish, and Turkish. So we do localize, we do collect the answers through these localized surveys. And that brings us the nice overview of the local markets. So if I want, for example, to see how we're doing or what is interesting happening on some Asia market, I will go and strip these specific countries by these languages, and I will just then do the research. Okay, so these were the things you can do to every survey. These are the things which I do treat as a sanity check for the data. So because we, through the years, realized that without that, we are not getting the trustable data. But then comes the nice stuff about the statement biases. And this is about how you ask the things and what exactly you ask. And for that, the research team always need my input because it's specific to C++. So that's not something they can guess on their own or validate the answers. And it's also about what and how you ask the questions. And we'll see the examples. And also which options you have. And I would like to promote this nice book to everyone who have never seen this. If you do any interviews with the customers or any surveys or any researches externally, read this book. Because it teaches actually how to ask the questions without an expected answer in your mind. And it helps you eliminate this answer from your question. Because quite often how we talk to the people, we're expecting some specific answer from them. And that happens on customer interviews or in the surveys. And this book is fantastic in terms of how not to do that. I'm now trying to say to everyone who's coming to our customers interview that you're not going to this customer interview until you read this book. Because otherwise they will spoil the data. They will spoil our talks. But I have to say that we were not always that smart. Asking questions is really hard. And when we started doing our C++ tools back in 2015, we were quite naive. We were very much interested in the data and in the community, and we needed some data as an input to start the tools for C++. So we launched the survey. And I have to admit, this survey was used later many times in the community. I saw it in Bjarne's slide. He asked me for permission to use it in some books. But right now, from the perspective of all these years with the developer ecosystem, I look at this and it looks to me so naive. So many simple mistakes we did there. So first of all, we didn't separate the professional and like just other kinds of developers at all. So we were collecting the data about all of them. So that's why we get something about 4 million C++ developers, that just all the crowds who maybe just learn C++ in their university and never get back to that because they don't want to see this language anymore. So, but I mean, we got quite a impressive number, which was good for the start for the tool, but it's not true actually. Also, I have to say that we got some very inconsistent list of the industries. So we were having, I guess, finance, banking, but we didn't include trading in the list, which is really stupid for C++ because all the HFT is done in C++. We included embedded, but not the telecom or electronics, and there were no IoT, I guess, in the list. So the list of industries there is really not reliable. I'm even not showing you the data because I really feel bad about the data we collected there. But also, like, my personal mistake was just to mix all the standards from C++ and C in one plot, in one question. That's what I did. I collected this nice plot, very beautiful, very colorful, but then I have everything just in one question, like C99 with like C11 and C++11. I'm like, what I wanted to ask with this question and which data I wanted to get with this question. But in the end of the day, it was not all that bad. So yeah, we mixed the C and C++ versions. But in the end of the day, we managed to figure out what is the like top 3 tools in the like C++ toolchain. So we made a decision based on this survey to start with CMake, to start with like GCC and GDB, and on Mac with Clang and LLDB based on this research. We just defined these top 3 tools for as the most important as the tool chain to start for the C++ developers. And I think our decision back then kind of helped Kitware with their CMake because we built a very nice support for CMake, excluding all other project models, which we only started adding a couple of years ago. But that was a decision made based on this data. So we explicitly were running this survey to get this answer. Talking about the data and how you can ask the questions and how you can get the useful answers. So every year, the foundation is asking, this is the data from C++ Foundation Survey 2023, because I will be comparing to developer ecosystems. So, oh, no, this is 24 actually, but never mind. Okay, so they do ask about, in the next 12 months, does your current project plan to start allowing additional use of newer C++ standard features? They also ask about some specific features you're allowed to use. But when I look at this data, and when I was first thinking about which questions should I put in the developer ecosystem regarding the migration from the standards, I quickly realized that it's more important to see at the paths. So from which standard to which standard the people are going to migrate. This is more important to me than just the pure knowledge that they're going to migrate in the next year. So we do ask all these questions. So if you say select that you are using C++11, we'll be asking you from if you say that yes, I plan to migrate, we'll be asking you about the other standards. And so we have all these paths, and we can revalidate them the next year. So did it really happen that like 50% of the people on standard X migrated to standard Z? And so we can actually build these nice plots and see how this migration to the standard is happening. And actually, I have to say that the migration for 14, 17, and even 20 looked very similar in terms of how the numbers grew for the year. C++ 23 looks a little bit more inspiring to me because it started quicker. So, but we'll see. It's still, the numbers are quite low for C++ 23 to judge that. But generally, we can build that and we can see how the standards grow through the years, how they're adopted in terms of not just a point of time when the standard appeared, but how it was adopted through the years. So yeah, upgrade paths are important, and I really use this data to understand how the people are coming, because I can predict. Actually, I can come to the team and say, we need to make this standard as a default for new projects in our IDE, because in half a year the people will be using that more than all the others, and this is the decision I can make based on this data, so I can prove my decision to them. But as I said, asking questions is really hard. If you take a look at the developer ecosystem and C++ Foundation, and this is really just the 2023 data from the foundation, but 2024, I checked that, has very similar numbers. You see that the foundation plots, which are in green, are much bigger than the developer ecosystem plots, which are in blue. And that's actually the thing we validated, that like foundation, they asked explicitly actually to check all options that apply. So there are some of the answers. There are both surveys. We have the multi-choice questions, but foundation is explicitly encouraging people to select more options, because in every question they have this check all that apply stated in the end of the question. And if you sum up all the options, you see that they get significantly more than 100. So they have more people actually selecting more than one option. And that kind of affects the data. But what is important is to see at the trend at this point of time. So I can't compare like if it's like bigger or smaller in terms of absolute numbers, because they have just the bigger numbers. But I can compare with the trend, especially if I look at through the years. But also another interesting fact is that we do ask the questions differently here. And I probably still have to discuss it with Herb and to figure out the reasons, because they do ask about first and third party libraries, and we only ask about the third party libraries. And that I have a suggestion that it also kind of affects the data, but I still need to figure out how to validate it properly. But because of this data, when we made it public, every year we ask some people from the community, some notable people from the community, to comment on the data. So last year we got Diego from Conan to comment on the data. And the first thing, of course, when he saw that, he was like, you have such a small numbers for Conan. What's going on? So we built extra plots for him to check the trend. And we were trying to figure out what's going on. And in the end, we agreed with him, and I got his permission to publish his quote here on my slides, that we figure out that they have in their data mostly the enterprise customers, and they see the growth through these customers. And these customers, if you take a step back and remember about the audience who is coming to the developer ecosystem survey, they are less experienced. They are probably working in smaller companies, and that's also true. We have this question about the size of the team and the company. So the data Diego knows about and the data which the foundation shows is more shifted to these bigger and professional developers in the bigger companies than the data we collect. So we see similar trends, but with significantly smaller numbers, which is also a nice outcome, because we kind of understand that, say, both Conan and VC package are widely used. And if you look at the numbers, they're quite good numbers in the foundation survey, like 19 and 21%. But that means these percents are for those more professional developers. So those who are just starting with the language, they're not using this tool yet. Yeah. So a little bit more about asking questions, which is really hard. And this is my favorite question, because I always feel passionate about our huge zoo of the project models in C++. And what the people are using is actually quite important to me. So I always see something like that. We had the CMake on the first place for several years already in a row. So they took this first place, and then now they're even growing even more. We also see some basal growth, actually, if you look at the timeline for the years. But also, if you look at the data, you first of all see again that CMake in our survey gets 54% and 80% in the foundation. But that's, again, probably because they have more options, which the people do check at the same time. But also, it's that all check all that apply effect as we treat it. But also we see this. And this is interesting because like it's Ninja. And we have like 15% and they have 43%. And it's growing every year. And I guess the thing here is that Foundation actually asks about the build tool because they have DCC and Ccache also in the list. And so they explicitly ask about the project model and a build tool. And most of the people are actually using, those who are using Ninja, they're using it as a build tool. Quite often it's packed with a CMake actually. So, and in our survey, we're focused on the words project model because we need that for our goals, because we're building the IDEs who are working through the project models. So we still have the option Ninja because everyone was kind of putting it to the other option. So we turned to extract it to the separate option. But it's not that big because if the person thinks about what project model I use, they think like, okay, I'm using CMake and the Ninja is a build tool. They're not asking me about the build tool. But the Foundation just mixes that in one question. So they get bigger numbers. And like DCC and Ccache also has something about 15% in the Foundation survey. And it's not a project model, it's a build tool. So this is about the fact that when you look at this data, you have to understand which question was actually asked. Because if you just take the picture without the context about what the question was, what was asked, and you look at that and see like, oh yeah, like say I have like this Ninja and other stuff. So, but what is it's actually doing here? Another example about asking the questions is hard is that we do ask about the code analyzers. And in the past, we were very much concerned about this huge none option. So if you don't see this none is actually 35%. We were like, that's too much. So you have to use the static analysis. You have to rely on that. Why you're not using anything? But then actually we, funnily enough, realized that we're actually extracting a big part of the people who are running code analysis on their CI. So we added the Sonar options to the list, and immediately they jumped to the 6%. So the people actually do use the code analysis more often, but some of them do use on the CI, and because they failed to find these Sonar options in the list, they actually put none of this. So yeah, we got this Sonar tools, and actually that's true that CI now matters. We see this shift to the more people doing the code analysis checks on the CI, and more of them like caring about that. And I think this is an important outcome as well. And also my personal funny story, which I really love, is that every time we do ask about the guidelines and which tools do you use for guideline enforcement, I was very much concerned about putting Clang format there as an option. But after a couple of years in a row, when I was getting it in the other options consistently, I said that like, okay, I'm done. I'm putting this to the main list and we'll see how many we get. And immediately the next year we got 21%. I did a whole lightning talk at CPPCon last year about explaining what that Clang format is not. I know that some people who are maintaining the Clang format was really unhappy with my talk because it might sound to them that I don't like the tool. I have to admit, I really love the tool. I think it's great. It's great that we have the standard format tool, which everyone in the community could just simply rely at, and that's just that costs nothing to them. Just take it and it works for you. But I was doing some interesting research, like we have the tool which scans the GitHub based on several parameters I enter. And I was trying to see how many repositories in C++ actually submit the Clang format file. I do understand that quite many do not submit the Clang format file and just depend on the default settings. But interestingly enough, I got this 8% who do submit this file. And so it is on the GitHub for this kind of 10 plus start C and C++ projects. But why initially I was not intended to put the Clang format in the list, because to me it was like a tool to format the code, and also because inside the team we know that it has this fantastic but still a fuzzy parser which you have to tune with sometimes this statement macros or some other things, because it's not doing the proper code resolve. just because it's fast. That's why it's not doing, not because it's lazy. No, it's great and it wants to deliver the proper indentation to you as fast as possible in the best way possible. And it actually does a great job through this generating annotated tokens based on the simple lexer. But I was kind of concerned of including it to the list with all the Clang-based tools which are doing the real parsing, because I know about all these cases when you are trying to explain to your Clang format how your macros are actually working and how they have to be formatted. But people do treat it as a guideline enforcement tool. So I said, okay, we got this 21 something percent every year for Clang format, and I said, okay, let's treat it as a guideline enforcement tool. Why not? And yeah, then we come to the topic of the unit testing. So back in the days when we were asking about which unit testing framework do you regularly use, and I also talked about that a lot at the conference, I was really surprised with this answer, none, for 41%. So really, you're not doing the test? What's happening here? So I look at this number carefully for several years, and then we started adding some other options, like I do write unit tests, but I don't use any specific framework. That kind of helped. 17% said, yes, I'm from this group. So I said, okay, so not that bad. we're not at the stage where it's really bad. But then we just figure out, we added a general question about what kind of the testing you're generally doing in your project. And quite many people from this non-group, they're actually just doing another type of the testing. They're doing integration testing or performance testing or some other kind of testing. So they just don't consider themselves doing a unit testing thing with this framework. So it's not about them. So they're not selecting any of this option, and then definitely say none here. But that doesn't mean that they are doing nothing. So that doesn't mean they are not testing their software. So no unit test doesn't mean no tests at all, which is a good thing. So let's briefly summarize about the asking the questions. So the things we learned through these years, and I will start with my personal mistake that C is not a C++. So never mix the C and C++ versions in one questions. C++ versions migrations paths are very insightful and can bring you nice information instead of just knowing that the people would like to migrate. If you want people to select more options, tell them explicitly, check all that apply, and they will do that. And yeah, all the things about the package management we discussed and project model vs the build tool. So ask wisely depending on what you want to get in the end. And code analysis on CI that matters. And Clang format is maybe not, but the people think it is. So let's just accept that. It's a great tool. And no unit tests doesn't mean no tests. When we came from this criteria, so we kind of tried to eliminate the biases, clean the data, applied all our knowledge about the specific market, about the specific language. Now it's time to validate the data, and this is an important step. But how to validate the data? So I've got all this nice and shiny data, and now I have a nice task of properly somehow to validate it. And so what I treat as a validation is the comparison to other surveys and other resources on the similar slices. So what I do when I have the several surveys, I try to grab my hands on their raw data, then I slice them on a similar criteria, and then I compare. So if the slicing on a similar criteria is similar, then I'm good. If the slicing on a similar criteria is different, I need to understand why it's different. Maybe that's the matter of the data collection. Maybe that's another thing. So I need to understand that. So just a few examples how we did that recently was that we, because I'm now working a lot with our game dev tooling, you can kind of notice that because I talk a lot about the game dev. We do collect lots of data from the game dev industry. It's very closed industry. Most of the people do not share any data, and they just love saying some big statements on, X or whatever social network they're using about how big their share is. But generally, to get the data which is proved is very hard on this market. And so we do this survey in terms of the developer ecosystem, but also Perforce is doing their state of game development and design. And there is also a Unity gaming report, and there are some others like the GDC I mentioned, and some like UK games industry census, for example, and other more independent researchers. And every time I do compare them, I try to, again, slice this data in a similar way. So for example, if I try to compare the audiences of the JetBrains, DeFeco, Perforce, and GDC report, the first thing I take a look at in the context of the game dev is how many AAA studios they have in the report. Because the data from the AAA gaming and the data from the indie gaming is completely different. So you should not compare that. You'll get like your Unreal and C++ on one side, and you get your Unity on the other side of the spectrum. So, and we look at the data from this perspective, understanding that in DevEca, we usually do not reach to these professional game developers. So we have quite a small amount of them, like 25%. But Perforce actually does a good job with that because they work for their customer base. And GDC report, they also have a small share of the AAA studios in the report. So you have to treat their data with this grain of salt. And so when we do compare the engine usage, for example, that's the first thing we see. So because if I come to someone and say like, yeah, Unity is the biggest engine, they will tell me, are you crazy? Like the biggest AAA games are done with C++ or Unreal Engine. And that's because we mostly have this like smaller studios and the smaller game dev, and the Perforce, for example, who have the biggest share of the AAA studios. They, of course, have the custom C++ engine and the Unreal Engine, both 4th and 5, as the big share. And what you can do next, and that's what we are doing next, is we're actually partnering now with Perforce to collect data together for both sides of the spectrum, so that we can have this data for AAA game dev, which they're collecting, and they can also have some of our data for like indie studios, because they're also interested in that. So when we move to the stage when we understand how the data collection is different in our cases, we realize that now we can partner to join this data and to get the collective data. And as you see in the very beginning, we have the Perforce data in our survey visualizer. So if I need to focus on the AAA game dev, I will go to their survey in our database and I will get the data. So partnering after you actually explore this option and you understand how they're different is quite important and can be easily done. Yeah, so this is actually mostly it. So I want to say big thanks to these people like JetBrains market research and analytics team. They're amazing because they're actually doing all the job. And I'm just looking at the data and operating with that at my talks. But they're doing an incredible job of like running, localizing, and pushing this survey to the world. Herb Sutter for collaboration around our two surveys. So like we discussed with him a lot about the C++ Foundation survey, and we aligned the questions to have them at least similar where we can do that. And for those who commented on our 2023 data, it was Bryce, Inbal, and Dayaga. And actually Inbal who inspired me to do this talk, because I started sharing some of this data at Core C++ as a lightning talk. And it was so hard to pack it in 5 minutes. And Inbal just came to me and told me, do the talk on that. After that, I'm saying to Pete that I'm not longer getting into the trap of doing a lightning talk, because after that, they asked me to do the full talk on that. But I hope you like that. If you need more links, they will be in the slides, which I'll share with everyone. So there are links to the surveys and like to the book and to some other stuff. Yeah. And that's it. We have some big time for questions or a coffee or both. Yeah, that's it.